All right, good evening. It's Tuesday, February 9th. This is the regular meeting of the Rhinebeck Central School District Board of Education. We have a motion to approve the minutes of the January 26, 2016 regular meeting.
So moved.
By Deirdre.
Second.
By Lisa. I believe there was a change to the minutes.
I had one on page 5, the school start time committee.
There's a new set.
Yes, okay.
So I don't know if the changes you requested are...
I know, they're there. They're,
Laura's is.
Oh, okay.
I had a change on one that I gave to Mary as well.
Okay. All right, so all those in favor of the amended minutes?
I'm going to abstain.
Okay, we have 5, all except Burns, and 1
Abstain.
abstention.
I wasn't there.
So that motion passes. We have an opportunity for public comment. Is there anyone from the public who would like to make a comment at this time? So I ask that you give your name and where you live.
Mark Long, Fox Hollow Road, Rhinebeck.
You want to come up to
Speak
the...
in the mic so that the people on Panda can hear you.
I understood that this was the last time to make comment about the school change. Is that correct?
No, you actually have 2 more times.
Oh,
but-
okay.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, my thought was that, kids had the same extracurricular and outside activities. And, if they start a half an hour, they're just going to end a half hour later. And there won't be really any change in sleep time. And I also think that, some outside activities may not want to, push their start times a half hour back. So kids will actually have a half hour less to do their work before they go to those activities. So it might end up that they'll have a half hour less of sleep time. I also think with, parents that drop their kids off with their schedules, and, I think that'll disrupt that. And also with sports in the late fall and early spring, that could, mess up those sports. So that's all I had. Thank you.
All right, thanks for coming. Anyone else? All right. Move on to the school start time proposal.
How do you want to do this?
Mark, after there's discussion about the proposal, will there be another chance?
Yes.
to-
Yep.
Yeah, how do you want to do it, Mark? Do you want to go through the minutes and
Well,
the
we have minutes from the school
information
start
that
time
you got?
committee, so let's go through those and we can kind of discuss
So
at the tail end of the minutes.
I'll do the minutes. So we met last week and we went through the most recent survey. This was a survey, that one-question survey that was asked for staff, parents, and students. The question was, do you support the proposal for a change to the school start time for next year as outlined in the email? So there was an email that was sent. It had all the information, and then there was a link to the question. So it was pretty much yes, no, or undecided, and then there was a place for comments. So we went through the results as we had them last week. On the yeses for the staff was about 65%, students were at 70% yes, and parents at 72% yes. No's were 18% for staff, 29% for students, and 22% on the parents' end. Staff had 15% undecided. None of the students were undecided at that point, and 5% undecided for parents. So we went through the comments. There was a lot of comments that came along with the survey. We really wanted to make sure that we had either addressed the comments already, or we were going to be addressing them next week, anything that came up. One of the things that came up were a question about students having to leave early for sports. When we went through this particular concern seemed to be more of a personal decision by a parent, not something that the school does. The school does not have, we currently don't have students leave early for athletics, and the start time would not change that. The only exception to this would be any teams or individual athletes that make postseason, sometimes sectional games, state playoffs, they need to leave early. That would be the only exception. So, and our athletic directors confirmed that we would not be having athletes leave early because of the start time. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew that. We also looked into the before school when kids can be dropped off at the high school and middle school. We spent a lot of time on that with Chancellor, but Joe re-verified with the high school and middle school principals what time they currently are dropped off and if there would be any problem with that for next year. Just a change to your minutes, it said 7 a.m., but it's the time is most likely 7:15, not 7, would it be for next year, when students could be dropped off prior to school starting. They're kept in the lobby, is our understanding, or possibly the cafeteria where they could get breakfast, and then different grades are allowed to go up into the classroom areas at different times. But so it's about 45 minutes before school starts that kids could be dropped off if need be. We went through the presentation that will be for the special meeting next week. Laura did a great job putting those slides together for us. We're going to add the new survey data as people are still filling out those questions next week, so we have the most up-to-date information. And then we talked a little bit about what would happen if this was voted through for a pilot for next year. We anticipate somewhere around this same time of year, February, March, that the board would be looking at that again to decide if it would be a permanent change for the following year or not. So that's what we did last week.
All right, questions or comments? Deirdre?
Yeah, no, I appreciate clarifying, being not on the committee, because I noted some of the comments from the surveys that there does seem to be some concern about students leaving early for school sport activities, so that was clarified that is not part of the plan. And, I just want to note that leaving early for sectional or postseason games is the norm now anyway, because many of those contests are during the day anyway. Also, I think it's really helpful to know, like this was helpful to me to really absorb that at Chancellor, students can still, under this proposal, students would still be allowed to enter school at 8:45. Right now, school starts at Chancellor at 8:55. With this proposal, school would start at 9, but yet students can still be dropped off. So that doesn't change. And then the fact that you've just also added to that the middle school, high school students can be allowed in at 7:15, which is a change of 15 minutes, but still is a lot of time should this be disruptive to certain people's schedules. I was not aware of that. So that's an important point, I think, for me to know. And parents too, I think, however you're doing the presentation next week, those might be highlighted things, because it does seem like those speak to some of the issues people have raised.
Yeah. That's why we tried to go through the comments and make sure we're addressing them next week, or we're touching on questions that are still out there.
Lisa?
One thing that I know that we've discussed in the full board, and from the prior minutes I know that you talked about in your committee meetings, is the issue of setting parameters for evaluating the pilot program. And so now that we're coming close to the point where the board is going to get the opportunity to vote on the proposal, I was wondering where you stood on developing those parameters.
I mean, we have talked about it. We didn't spend a lot of time because we don't know what's going to happen, so we focused on putting the presentation together. That's where the committee's going to pick up if this proposal goes forward. I mean, we've talked about having someone come in to do surveys of the students. We would look at all the data that we've talked about, whether it's discipline records, test scores, everything we would look at and see if there was any change next year. But we really haven't pinned down exactly everything that we would do yet.
And we've also gotten a commitment from a local psychologist to help us
To do that
develop
survey.
the survey questions to sort of assess students' sleepiness scale. We'll start that in the spring if it goes through, and compare it to next year, with the later start time, if they feel differently about, their alertness and so on.
Deirdre?
I just want to add to that the desire is to create an instrument that'll be, easy to administer, that would get us data at the beginning and then midway through the pilot and then toward the end, so we can really see as one measure how successful it is. But another thing we're very committed to doing is sitting with all the people who actually see the most, like the nurse, the counselors, the school psychologist, what kinds of issues students are dealing with. They're a little harder to measure, right, in terms of health and wellness. And we want to develop with them a set of questions we would ask. And so it isn't just kind of quantitative measures of success, but qualitative measures as well. And one thing we've been very, very aware of throughout all these conversations is unexpected things will come up. I mean, that's one of the great things about the iterative process of developing this proposal, is that many parents, teachers, and kids have raised questions with us that we haven't thought of. So we want to build into the process of evaluating the pilot moments where, like, what unexpected consequences have arisen that we could not have imagined when we were talking about this a year ago. So I think that's very important to acknowledge, that we don't want to just have one measure, like test scores or whatever it would be, that we want to remain flexible enough to kind of gather information from a lot of different sources.
Okay. What I would hope and I expect from the comments and the things that you led us through in the course of this project is that whatever measures you ultimately recommend and are used to evaluate the pilot will be objective, or will be sufficiently objective to give the board comfort that they're getting a clear picture. Because I think the one thing that we have to guard against, and that we've seen, I think, in some of the comments that we've gotten back with the surveys, is sort of the anecdotal, personal experience coloring the view of the project. So, there are people who are very excited about the idea of making this change because of things that they've read or because of background that they have. There are other people who are less positive about making the change because of personal experiences they have with their own children or with children that they know, or with their own work situations. And you can't say that anybody's experience is not valid, but individual experience doesn't really tell you a lot about whether the project's working.
Yeah.
So ultimately, for me anyway, the whole key to this is whether the evaluative measures that are put into place along with the change, assuming that we approve it, would be real measures that would really, tell the board whether it's working.
Deirdre?
So a couple of things that I think could be measured. Like, I think it's great to do, it is important to do qualitative stuff, but some quantitative things I'm sure you've thought about, but since this is my opportunity to talk to you about it, tardiness of students, right? That's something that's measured. And maybe also, I don't know how, I'm sure we keep this data, right? Like how many students late to classes, not just to first period. Because the proposal has it being reduced to 3 minutes between classes instead of 4 minutes at the middle school, high school. So, and I, would anticipate, just in response, and I'm sure you've thought about this, to one of the comments from a student, like, would it be early in this process next year, if this is what happens, letting the teachers, give some flexibility, because these students will have to adjust. Your clock is like 4 minutes. A lot of these kids know 4 minutes, now that'll be 3 minutes. So, so if we do that, that seems like important information. Like how on time the buses are in the morning to both schools, and, to speak to the concerns of this gentleman here, maybe if Steve Boucher could sort of also tap into how late athletic contests, like the buses return to school, sort of, not everyone, but sort of throughout the process, kind of, it seems important to know if kids are routinely getting back from athletic contests very late, we just would maybe want to know that. That can be an issue because I don't know whether, Steve, it may be that the contests are not changing at all, or Steve is saying to certain school districts, instead of a 4:15 start, we need a 4:30 start. I don't know.
That is what he's doing. He's massaging the fall schedule so that we're hopefully able to travel to faraway places like Ellenville in the early part of the season when it's still light out.
Right.
And he has told Joe on any number of occasions that he's confident that there's
Yeah.
not going to be any kind of issue with the actual contest schedule. If he needs to fudge 15 minutes, he doesn't think that's going to be a problem with the schools. And so if it's 15 minutes later, the kids are not going to be getting back an hour later or
right.
half an hour later.
And just knowing that would be important for people to
Yeah,
know,
absolutely.
even next year, if there were any issues with that. I mean, clearly, when you're, any of us who have children who've been in played sports, I mean, there are times you get back really late, even
Yeah.
now,
Yeah.
because you're playing teams so far away.
Yeah.
But I think kind of a report on the impact of the athletic program in terms of those kinds of questions and other questions would be important to have. And then in terms of surveying, I just wonder if also we might want to consider just a kind of survey that you've done so effectively this time around.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
like SurveyMonkey,
Yeah.
midway through or
Yeah.
halfway through, how's it going?
And something to remember is they're getting 30 minutes in the morning, but we're only taking 20 minutes away at the end of the
Yes.
day. So if we're talking about athletics, we're not pushing everything a half hour. It's at 20 minutes. So, it's that and getting the athletes on the bus a little bit quicker.
Yeah.
Not allowing as much time maybe as we allow now. I think a lot of the contests will start at the same time. Certainly all the home contests would start at the same time. And
Right.
So
So I
really
think it
only
would
a
be,
couple.
if I may, I think it would be useful to highlight in the presentation that actually the school day is 11 minutes shorter or something? Is that it? Or for the middle school, high school. So that, because I have to tell you that I did not exactly absorb that until seeing this schedule, this one that you proposed. Like, I just measured out everything in my mind, but until I had seen that wasn't crystal clear to me, because then this concept of half hour then extends to, half hour, everything's half hour later.
When it's
so, but that's not really what's happening.
Right.
So I think it would be good to highlight that.
Okay. Thank you. That's really important.
And then I just also have one other question. At the time that this board packet was made, only 17 students replied.
Students don't look at their email.
They don't use the school
Yeah, they're not
email.
using, we need
Unless
like
they're told
texting
to.
them or something.
We need to text the
We don't want their
We
phone
need to
numbers.
we did it before by paper
They're not
survey
using their
with them.
school email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just want to piggyback onto that because, and I appreciate, sending out the survey and compiling the data. I have to say I'm highly disappointed that we have less than 20% responses from people to a single question survey. Okay? So if you only count the people who responded, yes, 65, 70% of the people are in favor. But in reality, we had less than 19% of the teachers answer who responded to the survey. We had only 17 students out of 700 respond to the survey. And I gotta look at the other number.
I think the teacher numbers are a little high.
It was sent to 197 staff members. These weren't just teachers.
Right,
They were
right. I beg your pardon.
any district employee with an email address.
And 132 parents that responded. So, for me, I'm going to have a really hard time voting yes on this proposal, in spite of the fact that I support moving the start time later in the interest of student wellness, because I have not heard from a significant number of the community that are in favor of this change in the start time. So I just want to make that clear. I would really appreciate if, before the public hearing next week, if we send out a robocall to remind people that we're having a public hearing, because I would really like to see a good crowd of people who speak and say let us know what's on their mind, because I I'm going to have a really hard time voting yes 2 weeks from today unless I hear from a significant number of people that they're in favor of this measure. Go ahead.
Okay. I share your frustration. I think probably everybody at the table would like to, hear from everybody or a large percentage of the community that's going to be affected by this change if we make the change. But the unfortunate reality of surveys generally, and I mean, we can see this in the political season that's developing right now, is that surveys are overwhelmingly not responded to. That people hang up on telephone call surveyors, that they don't respond to email surveys, that if you buttonhole them physically, they will mumble something out, but usually it's something ill-considered, not necessarily reflective of their real views. I think there's value to doing surveys, but if, you have to view them as a limited tool rather than, basically a direct democracy statement of how everybody in the votership feels about it. I mean, I'm not saying that you shouldn't base your decision on the survey results or the participation in the survey, but, let's be clear-eyed about what surveys' capabilities are and what their limitations are, too.
I mean, I understand that, but, we also sent out and said, you have 3 opportunities to make a comment. We received a few emails. I didn't really count how many we received, but I would say it's less than 10 emails. Tonight is one of the opportunities for people to comment. We have 3 people here, sorry. Thank you for coming out. I'm having a really hard time. It's very frustrating to me that we have such a low number of people that are responding. So that's all I'm going to say about that at this point. Go ahead, Laura.
I do just want to, I agree. I'm really disappointed that a one-word question wasn't responded to. We have surveyed our parents, and we did it in November. One of the comments you saw in our packet is one parent saying, "Why do you keep surveying us?
Yeah.
This is ridiculous." So it's possible that people are just sort of
Had their
survey
say.
weary. That said, we had about 50% of the parents last time respond.
Yeah,
So people have actually lodged their opinion, both pro and con. We're trying to see if people's attitudes have changed, and we'll show that in the presentation next week, which you'll get ahead of time.
So is the survey still open so that people can still
Yes.
answer?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's still open. And we get a few additional every day, but not like we did the first time around. But I can send a reminder out for
That'd
those
be good.
people who didn't
Yeah.
do it. I can send that out tomorrow.
I would
to
really
generate
appreciate
some
that
more-
because I would really like to see
Yep.
more input.
Yeah, I'll do that.
Diane?
I mean, I agree that it's frustrating, but I go back to any time we've asked for parent input, I go back to the veterans vote, which was a big deal. We maybe had 10 people here and maybe got 10 emails, and we kind of beg people, like, please, let us know how you feel about this. I mean, I don't know. I wish people would let us know how they feel more. Some people would take that as they either don't care or they're okay with what's going on, but I don't know how you can, we've reached out as much as possible, but I don't know what else you can do.
Deirdre?
Well, I just want to kind of speak on behalf of those who have taken the time at least once to fill out a survey, to attend a meeting, to be here tonight, to come to the information session we already held. I hope we'll come to the next information session, come to coffee with the board over the last year and a half, send us email, single-time email communications. I think there's been a lot of input in different ways by members of our community, and this one thing that I think we should be very patient with in making a decision, which is to give people plenty of opportunity to continue to give us their thoughts, and for those thoughts to be informing ultimately what we do. And that is something that's been very helpful about using all these different means. It has given us really great ideas and great questions that have materially impacted the proposal as it's coming into shape. The proposal we're even looking at tonight is not the proposal it was the last time we were talking. So I find that process of people giving feedback extremely important. It has to happen over time. It has to happen with multiple moments for people to get involved in the process. And there still are several occasions where people are going to be able to give us feedback, particularly next week. So I don't have that sense of pessimism about community input. And I don't assume because someone maybe participates once and then doesn't answer the survey later, that necessarily kind of ties our hands in terms of making a decision. So I'm hoping we'll get, continued feedback to the point that people will feel that they have enough to go on in making a decision. And certainly understand your frustration. It's when you want to look at any one kind of collection and you feel like you're only getting a small percentage, it's very frustrating.
Lisa?
Did you want to go first?
I don't care.
Go ahead. Because I was going to change the direction
Oh,
of the
okay.
discussion.
So
Slightly.
then I will, just to say that I'm disappointed in the student participation number, and I totally understand why, because we just know that's an issue with kids is email. They don't, it's not really how they communicate, but I'm impressed with the parent feedback and the staff feedback, and I mean the 50% is tremendous, and I guess I have not thought of the surveying as like a vote.
Yeah.
It's really more, feedback. What do you have to say? And let's take it all in. So I'm not educated enough in research methods, but I think when you get like a 20% response rate, that's a good response rate. I don't know if our process, when you send an email to a very, specific set of people, if you get 20%, what that is. But I mean, I think survey data can be based off of a sampling that's much less than that. So to me, because the numbers are very skewed towards both in parents and in staff, this particular student number is low. I think there was a higher student number.
Yeah, because they were
last
given a
time.
paper survey.
Because they were
They had to do it
survey.
in class.
Just
In
everybody
class.
just
We just
about.
didn't.
To me, I feel that is very, probably representative, a good sampling of if you did get a vote, that would be kind of not unlike that, because that's just, how data works, is you only need a sampling to kind of represent the rest of the group. But again, I haven't thought of it as a vote.
No.
And I do thank the committee for the multiple ways that we have, that you've connected with people about this.
Lisa?
Are you going to a different topic or same topic?
Well, say school start, but,
So you go first and then.
oh, okay. I found the comments very enlightening and very helpful to read them. And there were a few themes that I saw in the comments, but one of the themes that I saw, and the one that I want to take up now, is that there seems to be a continuing, what I think is a misunderstanding of the underpinning of this change, the reason why we're considering this change in the first place. And I have to admit that it took me a while to sort of figure it out too, and so I have a lot of empathy for people who've expressed this confusion or this misunderstanding, and that is that it seems that there are people who still think that, or still don't understand why kids can't simply go to bed on time or can't simply go to sleep earlier, and if they did that, or if their parents made them do that, that there would not then be a need for changing the start time for the middle school and high school kids because they'd be getting enough sleep. And I think that that's an important thing that maybe we've not communicated sufficiently, and the session next week would be an opportunity, maybe the best opportunity in terms of the timeline, to make that clear, that it's not that, kids aren't going to bed early enough, it's that as they come into their adolescent years, that their body chemistry and their brain chemistry changes so that they can't fall asleep as early as they could when they were elementary school kids. And so it's not that they need to be put to bed earlier or made to go to bed earlier, but that the start time needs to reflect the fact that they aren't getting as much sleep. And, to try to build it back in with the time shift that their bodies are already experiencing. I mean, I think that it's not necessarily an obvious point to grasp, and so maybe the presentation needs to really lean on that to make it clear that that's why we think this is an important change to make.
Agree. I definitely agree.
Diane?
I was just going to say, the parents still have plenty of opportunity to give their feedback. You can answer the survey. You can come next Tuesday. You can come the 23rd when the vote is and give public comment. You can contact members of the committee, members of the board. So everyone still has an opportunity. So, this is your chance. So I would just make that plea for everyone to please, let your voice be heard. This is the time.
All right, anyone else? Yes, go
Yeah,
ahead.
I just want to second what Lisa said, because that was another point I was going to make. So which is to say that, like, I too wasn't quite seeing it that way and understanding it.
Right.
And it is also really, we see it all through the lens of our own families and how that affects us. And, clearly it's an issue. I mean, I will say, because that took me a little bit of time to come to that, because as my kids went through school, I have a different approach to all of this, and they had different needs. So, but to see, like, well, this is an issue that's larger than my own family, and an issue that's clearly out there in the literature, and whether it's a function of a more recent kind of way that we live or not, it clearly is an issue. And so I think trying to highlight it in that specific way that Lisa's saying, like, it's not just about, like, individual kids need to get to bed earlier, but it's a little bigger than that. Would be important.
All right, anything else on school start time? Okay, we'll move on to board committee reports.
Should we let our, or where are we
Do we want to suspend the rules to
do
allow
public
more
comment now?
comment?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, can I have a motion?
I move to suspend the rules to allow public comment earlier now after this.
All those in favor?
Second.
Okay. Is there any other public comment? Go ahead.
Michael Dam, 65 Northby Road, Corners. I had a lot of questions that I contacted Diane about. She answered a few of them, but there's just a couple of comments that I'd like to make, especially about some of the things that have gone around the table. That, I propose that there may be another way to look at the adolescent delays and when they sleep, and I understand that there's medical studies about that, but there's also medical studies that show that it's a cause and effect relationship, and that because when they become adolescents, as parents, we don't dictate a bedtime anymore. So we're, in a sense, allowing them to stay up later, and their bodies adjust for that. I can tell you, I worked with a night shift for 15 years. My body adjusted. So I got tired at a totally different time than the rest of the world did, and I was wide awake. And I look at that as something that may be the cause behind why kids. So I think that there is something to the fact that when we say we don't, why don't people just give their kids a better bedtime? There's something to be said for that, I think, because by not giving them bed, if we look at the ages that we're talking about, we stop giving them bedtime when they leave the elementary school, for the most part, or we stop being so strict about it. And what kid isn't dreaming of the day when they don't have to go to bed when they're told to go to bed? So now they have that option, so they go to bed later. So naturally they wake up, they want to wake up later. So I think that is something to be thought about, whether that can be changed or not. But I think that that's what's driving their circadian rhythm to be the way it is. Well, there's certainly studies that show that. I know there's studies that show that it's a natural progression. Another comment is that in the research that I saw that was given out by the panel, it was a 1 to 2 hour delay start, and I haven't seen anything that shows a half-hour delay and what the positive effects of that half an hour are. Now, I think that there may be one that we just haven't been given yet. So I'd like to see that, because without that, the absence of that, I wonder, well, why are we doing it half an hour? I mean, to do things for the sake of change isn't necessarily a good idea. If we have data to support it, then I'd like to see the data. But the data that's been presented so far, at least that I've seen, has been that 1 to 2 hour delay. And I can see maybe that being significant. I just don't see the significance in half an hour, certainly if there's no data. Some of the other things that were brought up were the positive effects of the delayed start. And there was tardiness, accident rates, depression rates, test scores. We have higher than average test scores, so I wonder, after making a half an hour change, how we're going to gauge. And I know, and I appreciate that's been talked about, how are we going to measure this? Because of the 4 that I mentioned, higher than average test scores already exist, so I don't know how we'll measure that. We don't even have a measurable accident rate. I don't know if the panel had a chance to look at that, but I mean, most of you know what I do for a living, so I looked it up. It's not even measurable. It's not even 1% of an accident rate involving high schoolers during that morning commute. I did find 2 that were weather related. I don't think the delayed start is necessarily going to change that. So if we're going to look for what kind of changes we're going to see, I don't know what our rate of depression is, but you know, I don't know. I can only speak from my family. I have 3 that have already gone through, 1 in high school now, 2 up and coming, and you know, so I don't see that, but that's my little bubble. But as far as the tardiness goes, I also don't see necessarily the gain if you're going to have now more of a percentage of kids that are going to leave after their parents go to work. And I think, I mean, I would imagine that a certain percentage of that tardiness, if not a big percentage of that tardiness, is they just don't want to come on time, you know, where there's no one telling them to get there on time. And if you have more parents leaving before their kids leave for school, and have we looked into what the tardiness is, what the cause of the tardiness is?
Yes. Really pretty high.
Okay.
Causes, I don't know. Parents.
Parents already, honestly, a lot of the kids are coming
I would
later.
assume, right,
Yeah.
it stands to reason that if the kids go to school now, half an hour later, there's going to be a higher percentage of kids that are leaving after their parents. I would think. This doesn't affect me. I don't have the child care issues. It doesn't, none of this, the delayed start doesn't, I should have said that right from the start. It doesn't affect me. I'm just trying to speak for some parents, I think, that are affected by it. Whether they're a half hour later, to me, it doesn't really matter. I do have an issue with the way we're combating the after-school sports and dealing with those times, and I think that the way we're dealing with that is to shorten the amount of time that we give them between classes. So instead of, we start a half an hour later, but we're only ending 20 minutes later, and we're gaining that by shortening the time period between classes, if I understand it correctly. I know my son, from the moment he gets to school, and part of that is, you know, the arrival of the bus, he doesn't go to his locker at all. He takes his jacket everywhere he goes, he takes his 25-pound book bag everywhere he goes. Shortening it by a minute could be a big difference. I know we don't have a big school, but, you know, I just know from his personal experience, and then asking my, you know, it's been a topic in our house, so I've asked my older girls who have gone through, and, you know, they don't know how it's going to be accomplished. I'm sure it's been looked at, but, you know, I think that shortening it, I think we're shortening the amount of time between their classes just so that we can accommodate the sports. And I don't see any other reason why we did that, unless I'm missing something. But I think the reason to shorten their span between classes was strictly so that we could adhere to the sports schedules.
Not that
Actually, it wasn't.
That's not true.
Actually, it was for busing.
For bus.
Yeah,
For busing.
for busing, and impact on Chancellor, the impact on
And that was
Chancellor.
a major concern of mine.
Yeah.
Diane tells me that's not such a big deal, but I didn't understand at first how we could start the high school 30 minutes later, but yet the elementary would only be
Right.
5 minutes later,
Right.
until she explained to me that the buses sit around for a considerable amount of time. Although, obviously, there were issues in the beginning of the year. I don't know how much sitting around they were doing because they still weren't getting out. So my concern is how that will affect next year, especially if we don't use the same bus fund. So that was some of my concerns.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, is there anyone else who'd like to make a public comment?
Maureen Terranova. I have kids in elementary and still to come in elementary, but one coming into middle school, so this is a sort of up-and-coming issue for us, and I appreciate many of your comments as a father who's got high school kids who've been through this, because it's very enlightening for me to sort of see it from both sides. Listening to the data presentation about the survey and hearing sort of the lack of student input, and the comments that went around about, well, students don't read their emails, then why aren't we reaching out to them in another way? And I think this goes back to some of your comments about your son. How is he going to handle that 3-minute time interval between classes? Maybe his voice hasn't been heard except, through your representation, carrying this book bag, or kids who can manage the 4 minutes, but maybe then won't manage the 3 minutes. There has to be another way to get an answer from the students if email isn't the right way. 700 students and only 17 replied. So, they're here every day. I don't know if paper or text or what the process should be, but there's got to be another way to just get a representative voice from the student body. And the comment that I had that he said very well, and I'm going to just reiterate, is a half hour going to make a difference? It seems like a lot of effort to go through, and I am in favor of this movement sort of nationwide to think about this, but does a half hour make a difference? It's a lot of hoops, it seems, to jump through, and what's really going to be the outcome. And how, you've talked about how that might get measured and over what time frame. And then if it doesn't seem to make a difference, then what do we do? Do we go back? Do we leave it as it is? Do we then, what's the time frame over which we're going to sort of look at that? It just seems like a lot to do for 30 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, anyone else?
Go on.
So can we, honestly.
I did really want to know how we'll, I think I brought it up, but how we'll accurately measure the success or failure of it, and will we be able to accurately measure it? If we can't, what do we do then? Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to board committee reports. First up is finance. Why do those? All right, so our meeting was last Monday. We had an update on transportation. Tom has met with our transportation vendor management, and we should have a discussion about that discussion in executive session. We received an update on the cafeteria. There is still a loss in the cafeteria program. It seems to be much less than it had been. And the loss seems like it will decrease once we use up inventory that we have on hand. We had requested that we get to review the participation numbers. They seem to be down a little bit through the year. So we want to see those numbers at our next meeting. The cafeteria program is going to be getting a review, and I forget what the initials CRE stand for.
We just got a pre-review, and we got our actual date, it's March 10th, so.
Okay.
They're doing chancellor, so.
So Red Hook is going to be reviewed around the same time as us. It's an audit of the cafeteria program where they look at lunch menus and their nutritional value, and how we count the students, especially free and reduced price students. It's an every 5-year review, and the results will be available a month or two after the review is completed. The amount of the unpaid charge balances has decreased, so that's a good thing. And the online payment system is said to be working well. We received a budget update. Each school building's been asked to reduce expenses by $100,000, and each department by $50,000, which would reduce the budget gap by $500,000. Once the proposed cuts have been completed, they'll be provided to us for review. And we talked a little bit about potential cuts due to declining enrollment and any cuts we might be able to make to the athletic program. So, any questions? Lisa?
I was very struck by the numbers, the amounts of reductions that are being asked of each of the buildings and each of the departments. You know, considering the budget as a whole, those seem like very large numbers. And I'm wondering how that's going to be accomplished without affecting programs. Do you have a sense of that yet, or are you waiting to see what they come back with?
Well, what we were told is that the different school buildings have decided to make cuts in different ways. So one building might cut program while another might cut supplies or other things in their budget. So they haven't really, as of our meeting, they hadn't really decided what they were going to cut, but they were working on it. So we don't really know what is going to be involved until we get the list.
You'll get the list at your next board meeting. We'll be discussing it at admin council next week. Go over it to finalize it and get the, I don't know if we get to ranking, putting them in orders in which we want. We don't want any of the cuts,
Right.
but we know it has to be cuts. And it will affect the program. There's no doubt about it. It's how much it will affect the program is going to be the real and true question. Whether it's cutting sports teams or after-school athletic or after-school clubs or increasing class sizes, fewer sections in certain grade levels. I mean, everything right now is on the table and still being discussed. So we want to make sure it's the least impact, especially to the program, as possible. But it's a tough one to balance this year. Tough one.
Deirdre?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to sort of amplify what Lisa's pointed out, because this is, a really huge issue, that might impact people going forward more even than school start time, which is that we're looking for $500,000 in cuts to the budget. And having met with a couple of our legislators more recently, we're looking at maybe our best hope is to get more state aid. There's not a lot else coming down the pike that's gonna, having been on the board for so many years, seeing often you can sort of see a path that you're hoping as the fog clears, the path will take us to the right place where we don't have to make cuts. But this year, honestly, I have to say, I'm not seeing that path so clearly. So yes, it's a lot of money. I think that in finance, we talked really just to see let the administrators do their work and make those tough decisions to bring to us and go from there.
Diane?
So the cafeteria, they've made so many great changes. I just would say we just have to keep an eye on this. There is no room to lose money in the cafeteria. So hopefully it will straighten itself out and won't be an issue. As far as the budget, I do have a question. I don't envy the principals having to make these cuts. These are going to be difficult cuts. Over the last several years since the tax cap, they've been chipping away and tightening their budget, so it's not like there's a lot of fat to trim anywhere. These are going to be deep cuts, I think. Could Tom just tell me which $50,000 for each department? Is there what?
Like
what is that?
operation and maintenance, technology, curriculum and development. The district, meaning the business office, Board of Ed, the whole administration part.
Athletics.
Athletics, though we weren't looking for $50,000 from him, that's a matter of determining what we could possibly do. I mean, I'm not looking to cut 50,000, I mean, that would decimate that program. You'd be losing 10 teams if you were to do that. But, you know, some cuts from the athletic department to put on the table. So, unfortunately, special education, it's really what they need. Unfortunately, there are cuts you can't cut. There are things that are mandated and you can't cut from it. But we will trim where we can, supplies and materials, that type of a thing,
Right.
and rely more on the grants to do those type of things. But that's not a whole lot of money.
And then just the last thing I would just say, with the declining enrollment, I mean, separate from looking for financial reasons to look at that, I mean, I would still stress that we should be looking to make, you know, a 5-year plan or something about the declining enrollment to account for that. You know, we can't react to it, we need to, like, look at, as these numbers come through, what we have to do, you know, separate from budget reasons.
So Laura's hand up?
Yeah, sort of piggybacking on Diane's, you know, we have been chipping away at, you know, budget lines here and there for the last at least 3 years that I've been sitting here. And I appreciate that we want the administrators to sort of do their job and, you know, find the money where they can. But I would appreciate sort of a longer range view of what they're planning in their buildings, rather than just, you know, a couple fewer supplies this year. And because the problem's not going away, the cap's not going away. And the problem is going to continue to exacerbate and compound. So it would be helpful to sort of see that long-range planning.
Lisa?
Not to steal a march on the part of the discussion about budget development, but Tom, if you could just address if the department heads and the principals were able to deliver the kinds of cuts that the Finance Committee has discussed with them, or that has discussed, what would that mean in terms of the gap between the tax levy limit and the amount of income that we have?
That would cut it about in half. Right
So we
now.
would still be looking
Yeah.
at about a $500,000 gap.
Right now, we have about $1 million gap. We had no teacher retirements.
Right. I saw that.
We still have a lot of questions on the special education side of the status of some of these students, whether they'll be graduating this year or not. Unfortunately, some of those things won't be known for a little while, unfortunately. But some of the things are becoming more clear as far as some of those numbers are concerned. So I think we'll have some savings on the special ed side. I think 1 or 2 of them are going to graduate, because I think there's 4 eligible right now. But I'm thinking at least 2 of them are going to graduate. But I haven't gotten official word that that's going to happen. That will help us get closer. I'll show you the budget numbers later on tonight, and I've recalculated the tax levy cap and all that based on the state aid run we got. So helps in one way, but hurts in another way. And I'll show you that as we go through it. I'm concerned about this budget. I truly am. There's a huge gap that there are still some unknowns yet. I mean, with health insurance, maybe even a 1% reduction in the health insurance rate from 8% to 7% is $50,000. I mean, it's not going to generate $200,000-300,000. I mean, last year we generated like almost $300,000 in breakage for teachers, and it's 0 this year. I mean, so one of those gaps that every year we say, oh yeah, we're getting. This year it's none right now. Tonight I think there is one, but it's not a retirement. It's just a person on a leave of absence for another year. But that's really not going to save me a whole lot of money because that person is young and is not near the top. So it's not like it's going to create a whole lot of extra cash.
So before we go on, Diana, I just want to clarify that the cuts that we mentioned here, they were discussed in the committee. They were not recommended by the committee. They were proposed by the administration. So Go ahead, Diane.
So just for process, so the building principals and the department heads will cut about 500,000. And then we'll have 500,000 left to cut. So we'll be asking them to give us lists or to look at further.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, we still don't know our whole state aid run yet. If gap elimination is going to be restored, that will, that will help out. Do we fully fund foundation aid? I don't know,
Sure.
What that state aid picture is going to look like, and that could generate $250,000 if it comes out right for our district.
But generally, that's the path we're looking at.
But yeah, I mean, but it's a tough year. I mean, there were some positives. We had the pension rates go down, but we've encountered huge special ed costs that are they're just humongous, that are really hindering us in the rest of the programs. And we may have to make cuts because of it. I mean, we've had tremendous amounts of special ed increases over the past 2 years. I mean, tremendous amounts. I mean, I've never experienced anything like that. Now, granted, a couple of years ago, we had the reverse of it, and we benefited from it. And we were able to keep programs in the past because of those type of things, because of those retirements. We've been able to save our programs where other schools have been cutting into their programs over the years, and we haven't had to because we've just been in a good place. Things fell for us. Not falling for us this year so far.
It would be nice, I think it was Mark's idea that, the special ed costs be deducted out of the formula.
Oh,
It'd be nice if the
listen,
state
I agree with that.
would take us up on that,
I agree. It shouldn't, because we're mandated to do these things. It's
not a
not an
choice.
option. It's an option to have a STEM lab. That's an option. To educate a special ed student, you don't have an option. You have to do it.
It's not only an
No
option,
matter
but it's
what
what
the
we-
cost is.
It's what we want to do.
Yeah, I've talking to one of my colleagues. He's got a $400,000 special ed student. And I'm going, whoa. But granted, he's going to get like $350,000 of that back. Problem is our school district has to pick up the first like $55,000 of that kid's education at a BOCES placement. The most the program cost over there is $60,000. You want to get $5,000 back from a kid? That's what's happening. Now, on the private side, that number is we only pay like the first $24,000. So it's, depending on where your kid's placed, depends on how much money you get back in state aid. And I just don't like how they do that whole thing. And because we're considered wealthy, where I have to pick up the first $55,000 of a BOCES placement, I could have another school district contiguous to us and they only have to pay the first $30,000 because we are wealthy. And I just so disagree with that.
We are classified as well.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about it. We're twice as wealthy as the average school district in New York State.
Well,
I don't see it. I don't think anybody
Yeah,
else sees
that's
it,
not with the
but
tax
that's what the
cap, we
numbers
see it.
show us. And that tax cap hurts us in that way.
Deirdre?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, we do have wealth compared to some of our neighbors, at least
Sure.
I think. So I just think that it's a structural issue that, we've talked about before, but I just always feel like it's important to say that we don't kind of blame special education. I mean, it is the structural reason why we're in this position, and what makes planning difficult is that when costs go up unexpectedly that you truly cannot prepare for. In fact, we would have been called out by the controller if we had a fund balance that was so excessive that we could have absorbed a 100% increase in our special education costs. That wouldn't be considered fiscally responsible management of your fund balance. So that's where we're caught between it. But these costs can't be anticipated, and I think we wouldn't be having this conversation to the extent that we are about cuts if this area of special education hadn't been increased so much. That being said, I think what we need to do, and I know, Joe's been clear about trying to get parents to understand that we need parents to advocate, is that it's good that we do provide these services, but the state and certainly the federal government, we get very little money in our budget at all from the federal government, doesn't pay for hardly anything of our budget, needs to step up, because our hands are totally tied.
Yeah.
But I just think it's really important that we understand it as like a structural problem with the tax cap in relation to mandates, in relation to what is important, which is that we educate all children regardless of what their capabilities are when they show up at school. And that's a good thing, but we need, and so I feel like, frankly, that our legislators don't quite get that. That's kind of lost, that they just look at sort of like numbers, and it's just like a spreadsheet, and not that they're real people who have real needs, and our hands are tied.
Lisa?
I completely agree with you. And I think, and I've expressed this in the meeting that we had with Senator Serino last week, that the problem that we're facing, the budget gap that we're wrestling with, that the Finance Committee's been wrestling with, we're going to be talking about further when we go through your next budget, next proposed budget, is a problem that is entirely of the state's making. And, you know, this is a situation where we are realistically prevented from raising the income that we need to discharge our responsibilities to all of the children who come into this district. Not just regular ed students, not just special ed students, but all the students who, Deirdre, I couldn't agree with you more. They have an absolute right to an appropriate education. In fact, it's mandated by state law, but even if it wasn't, we have a moral obligation to provide them with the education that they need. And to be in a situation where we're talking about requiring $500,000 of cuts and then being faced with an additional $500,000 that we've got to cut somehow seems utterly insane to me, and not at all something that we have the ability to affect, totally for reasons that the state has imposed upon us and the other districts in New York State. That's an untenable situation. I think that our community members should share in our frustration and our outrage about this, and, you know, make their voices heard with their legislators and with the governor and with, you know, everybody who is now discussing this issue in Albany, to make it clear that they cannot expect to shortchange school districts like ours in our ability to deliver education to our students. They take that seriously. So please write letters, make telephone calls, go to public meetings, make your voices heard. That's how we'll get the state to provide us with adequate income to educate all the children in this district.
Deirdre?
Well, toward that end, the Communications Committee will be meeting next week, and it would be helpful to get a sense from the board as a whole, everyone who's here tonight, if in answering your call, we do sort of communicate out to families in our district all the means that are at our disposal in terms of contacting our representatives, Albany, in very concrete ways. I mean, we've been talking about this for a long time as part of our board goal of advocacy, but time is growing short. And even when we talked to Sue Serino, you know, we said there may be letters coming from the Rhinebeck School District. You know, we would like to partner with you in working towards the changes that need to take place. But it seems like it's important that we share concretely with our community the options we have for communicating that.
Diane?
I think it's important to note that you hear a lot from the politicians, the answer to this is to ask your community for a tax cap override. You know, that's always their answer, is to not fund properly, but, just go and ask for more money. So parents and community members should be aware that that's what our legislators think is a good solution to it. And it's not something that we've done or would prefer to do at this point.
Lisa?
It's also, I mean, you're right. We would rather not do that because we don't want to impose additional burdens on the taxpayers that we can avoid doing. And it's especially appalling to be in this position when the state has a $3 billion surplus. That is money that the state has, the money that the state can give out in additional state aid to Rhinebeck and other schools in the state. And they're at least the governors, I shouldn't speak for the legislature because they haven't been heard from yet, but at least in the governor's proposal, the amount of funding to school districts in the state is appallingly inadequate, and to be doing that when the state has an obscenely large budget surplus, it's immoral. It really is. I can't express it any more strongly than that.
All right, anyone else? All right, we'll move on to curriculum committee.
Okay, that's me. We spent quite a bit of time in our last meeting in the curriculum committee meeting with Dr. Davenport, who came to speak to an issue that arose. Unfortunately, I missed this conversation, but an issue that arose in the evening coffee with the board session most recently, where people were asking about what are the options for independent study at the high school level. And very helpfully, Dr. Davenport came and spoke with us about what that really means. There are opportunities for students in the high school to earn credits, certainly outside of the kind of ordinary curriculum of the high school, but typically we're not really calling that independent study. Independent study seems to describe only a very small number of cases where someone is literally trying to make credits, enough credits to graduate because of very particular circumstances. It's not an ordinarily offered part of our curriculum. Students do go on and take classes at colleges in the nearby area. One important thing for people to understand, though, is that a college class is not eligible for high school credit. You are receiving college credit for those courses, which of course you can get a transcript, and that can be part of your application to college later. It has all kinds of utility, but it doesn't have the utility of counting towards graduation from high school. That was important to kind of clarify. And then, of course, there's this other domain of online coursework. And Dr. Davenport shared with us the kind of background on the virtual high school and Accelerate U, both of which are programs students have been able to have access to gain high school credits. But at the same time, he pointed out that the completion rate is not particularly robust with these courses, and in a perfect world you would actually create a support system in the school for students who were engaged in that kind of coursework, and we just don't have the resources to dedicate a teacher to doing that. Questions apparently came up about, well, could a student just use free periods or study halls to go to the library and do an online course? And we talked about access to a computer to do that should be available to any student who is interested, maybe not always in the library, but certainly somewhere in the building. And ultimately, supervision of students who are doing online coursework is something that would be covered by the RTA negotiations. If you're making this part of a teacher's duties, then that's something that comes up with the RTA. We got into kind of a more wide-ranging discussion of what is the right number of study halls to have, and certainly in all my years as a parent in the district, I've heard a wide range of perspectives on that question. And I think one thing that Dr. Davenport, and to some degree also Joe, expressed is that we don't want to necessarily communicate that it's a norm or an expectation that on top of all of the coursework you're doing as an ambitious high school student here in Rhinebeck, you also have to be taking a MOOC or, engaging in some kind of additional AP class that you're doing online. And there's some tension right around how do we share these resources without it seeming that we're sort of saying, you should do this. So we kind of tried to share ideas about how best to give that information to families and to students, and through the guidance meetings that happen one-on-one with the plan of study for every individual student, certainly that is something that can be shared, just as other kinds of additional opportunities in the summer and other opportunities to learn can be shared. This opened up a kind of a wonderful moment with Dr. Davenport where he talked to us about some new course offerings that have been designed or devised by our faculty. And one really great one is that there will be yet another AP English course made open and possible for students as early as 11th grade. There's now a course that students tend to take in 12th grade. This is a more literature-based course as opposed to the language and rhetoric-based AP that we now have in the school. He walked us through a series of kind of different permutations of a high school schedule where a student would take both honors English and one of these APs in each year if he or she so desired. He talked about other kinds of courses that are being developed that would count towards the English credits that students need to graduate, such as a journalism course and a drama course. He shared with us the idea for a course on the mathematics of finance that would replace one section of math applications towards the graduation credits. He also shared the possibility of a Holocaust and Human Rights course and a local history course. These are all in the development stage, and frankly, the guidance office would have to determine whether there's enough student interest for these courses to be offered. That will be taking place over the next several months, and that Dr. Davenport would come with concrete proposals or requests to the board in early May once we have a sense of which of those new courses should run. It's extremely important to point out, again, given everything we've just been talking about, that the development of these courses would be in lieu of other courses that are under-enrolled. This is budget neutral. This does not represent any kind of addition to the budget whatsoever. And we commended all the faculty who were engaged in this kind of creative thinking about how to have students who might perhaps take more study halls or than they necessarily need to take to attract them with these electives and get them engaged with this coursework. Finally, we do want to update you on the audit that Marvin Krebs performed of our health curriculum, with particular focus on how to teach children across grades K through 12 about the prevention of childhood sexual abuse. He made an extremely thorough survey, not only the commissioner's regulations, but best practices as recommended by a host of professional associations. And of course, he talked to us about the status right now of Aaron's Law, state Senate bill that's under debate right now. We can share the link to the actual bill with anyone who's interested. The CDC is engaged also in providing tools for schools in health curricula development. Education law is also pretty unequivocal when it comes to the question of how we train school personnel as mandated reporters. We are in compliance with state regulations. However, he pointed out that the elementary health curriculum is probably in need of some further development and full implementation. There will be some time needed for this to take place to make sure it is fully aligned with state regulations and that we have a vertical integration of the curriculum from K through 12. He pointed to one particularly promising program called the Personal Safety Program. It's designed for children in grades K through 5. It's developed by Dutchess County Center for the Prevention of Child Abuse. It's a free program. Experts come in to work with us to think about how to integrate it into the classroom, and that is something he is interested in exploring further. We noted, as I think that it's well worth saying, last time, often these kinds of questions in a climate that is focused on test results and Common Core, which kind of crowds out a lot of the thinking we do about health and wellness in our curriculum. It's very important that we be mindful of the importance of continuing to develop our curriculum in this area. We asked the board to signal that it finds this an important task to do as well, not just those of us on the committee, even making time in the instructional day, once a year for this type of program is something that teachers might fear. Oh, we have so many other things that we're under pressure to do. How can we make time for this? It does seem that the board could take on a leadership role in saying, no, this is important to make time for in the school day. Again, I do want to reiterate that the program is itself very well funded. This particular personal safety program, it focuses on the protection and empowerment of children of all ages, and if we were to move forward with it, it would represent no extra cost to the district. We, again, want to thank those who brought this to our attention, and we will continue to keep you updated on progress.
Questions? Diane?
You're always busy in this committee. I do have a question. So these new, possible new classes, you talk about how the guidance counselors will gauge interest. I'm just wondering how that works. So the students all come in, do they say, are you interested in these 10 possibilities, and are you still interested in the ones we offer? I'm just kind of wondering how that works, because they're all kind of, it's like possibility, but yet they're plotting out a schedule. I don't know if they're going to get a real sense. I mean, it's difficult because, and then kids say, well, you're taking it now, I want to take,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, because there's a lot of great things here, and we also still have a lot of great things. I'm just wondering kind of the process of how they...
He didn't share with us exactly what the methodology is of these counseling sessions, other than to say, I certainly do know in past years, for instance, when we added more Project Lead the Way coursework or technology courses that were new, there was a kind of a period of time of reaching out to the students who might have an interest in it and building a sense of, have we met a minimum threshold of student interest to move forward? Certainly if you had more students, that would be great.
Right.
But we didn't get into too many details.
But I do know, actually, anecdotally, that the English department has actually posted these possibilities on their blackboards, and so the kids in classes are seeing. They already knew
About the AP, the
about
extra AP,
these,
yeah.
the journalism and the drama,
Yeah.
and all of those. So the teachers are actually talking about it, and the kids are.
That's great.
Yeah.
And just one more thing, sorry. So as far as the health curriculum, it's kind of a shame that this seems to have kind of gotten pushed out a little bit at Chancellor. I guess I would like to hear from Marvin, how he would expect this to take place. Would general ed teachers be doing it? Would it be assemblies? What kind of time is he taking out, and what would it look like before I would say how important it is? Of course it's important. There's a lot of important things. It's just, what would it look like? Would it be in gym class? What would, So I guess I would need more information from Marvin first.
Yeah, oh, obviously, yes. Yeah, I think this is just a very first step in terms of even him talking to lots of different people about kind of what's the state of the art in terms of this curricular piece. And also the expectation is not that we don't expect all of our teachers to have competence in sort of and sensitivity in terms of how they conduct those discussions. I think that there's a sense that bringing some kind of help in is probably useful.
Right, we have school psychologists.
Exactly,
we have,
exactly.
Lisa?
Wow. You guys really covered a lot. It's very impressive. I do want to ask one question just for clarification, because I'm not sure that I'm understanding what's here. In the section about the addition of AP English Lit, the sentence that reads, in 12th grade, students would be required to take English 12R, a course that could be waived under certain circumstances with the option to take whichever AP English course was not selected in 11th grade. So for students who would be in 12th grade next year,
Right.
those students will be required to take English 12R, which is the Regents English.
Which is the case now, yeah.
Right. but would have the option to take a second English course, which would be the AP course?
They could take the second course. They could just take one course, which my understanding is could be either of those courses, right? But yes, it's complicated. He drew a whole like chart for us about all the permutations and possibilities.
Okay.
But right now, students are required to take English 12R. And only under certain circumstances do they not take it. But that would be because they were in another English class, which is an AP class. It's just they're going to have 2 AP English classes to choose from over that 11th and 12th grade.
So right now, a 12th grader would have the option, a 12th grader who was, properly poised to take an English AP
Right.
class could take either 12R or 12 AP.
Yes.
And
Or
that would,
both. No, I
and
don't
that would
think so.
continue
They're
to be the
supposed to
case?
take 12R and then the
And then-
Regents, the AP in addition, right?
Yes.
And you're saying there could be a waiver with certain circumstances?
Right, with the
Which is the way,
12R.
I mean, it's kind of that, it's that way.
Sorry, the
now.
wording is poor.
Well, it's that way now, I think, right? It's been that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
The one important change, though, in this is that the English 11R, we've
That's-
also had
yes.
English 11 honors.
Right.
That's going
That's
away
right.
because the new Regent exam is being administered next year for the first time.
That's really the
So
change, right?
English
So-
11R will be
Is a-
mandatory.
a
Mandatory,
requirement, yeah.
yes.
And if they want to take a second higher level English course in 11th grade, they can choose from one of these
Right.
two.
As an
So that
elective.
AP
As an
is
elective,
new.
yeah.
Yes.
Okay, now I think I
Yes, yes.
Deirdre?
Yeah, and maybe we could get clarification for sure on that, because my understanding is that right now 12 is required. You have to, if you want to take an AP, you take both under very specific circumstances, which mean kind of like you're overloaded with your schedule. So that's been a controversial thing at times over the years. We might want to clarify with Joe at some point, is that changing or not?
Okay,
Just
we'll ask.
Because I know, that's cropped
Yeah,
up over
yeah.
the year, many years,
Yeah.
so. And I want to also just thank the committee, and I really want to thank Marvin for doing a thorough look at our health program K-12 with particular focus on the issue of child sexual abuse. And I think the information that you provided us from the Center for the Prevention of Child Abuse, which is right here in the county, could be very helpful in using, really, as Diane pointed out, the expertise of people, because there are very nuanced and complicated issues when you're talking to young children, as we know, and has been brought to our attention by members of our community that I think are really important, and that our teachers would understandably feel not, able to necessarily address fully and appropriately at different ages. So I just want to thank Marvin, and I do support trying to, I know that Marvin and our teachers always struggle with this test-oriented, highly rigorous curriculum, and also trying to figure out how do we care for our children emotionally and who they are as people in our community and growing. And I always commend our staff and Marvin for setting a tone that all of that is so important, and I would just continue to support that in this important topic to make room for it.